It's great to be here today. I'm very much looking forward to the album release on Friday, the 26th of June. Eden, the music of Ed Picton-Turbervill. It's a fascinating project and it's been great to work together on it. The main piece is the big multi-movement Out of Eden. So let's just dive straight in with that. Tell us a little bit about that as a piece. How did it come into existence? How's it structured? What can people be listening out for?
Yeah, it all started that I wanted to write a piece about extinction. I wanted to write something addressing that crisis. And so I thought it would be quite interesting to write something that used the sound of an extinct animal, and I quite quickly found this bird song, the Kwai-o-o, a recording of the last male singing in the 60s, calling for a mate who, obviously there was no mate. Mm-hmm. This bird was the last of its kind. And I'd been inspired by Rautavaara, by Jonathan Harvey, and I came up with the idea of some kind of duet filling in the spaces in the bird song, and wrote a piano piece for myself. And it finished with an extract from William Byrd Civitas, Zion Deserta Est, that amazing homophonic moment. And so I guess even from the very start of that piece, I had a sense that maybe this could turn into something larger.
Yeah.
And then we met and had coffee, and I mentioned the desire to write something bigger, and that was how Out of Eden came about.
Absolutely. And so that movement that did exist then became the catalyst, and there was an organic growth to something that's bigger. How did you take that movement and expand it? Was that the starting point? Was that bird song reference going to be the end point? Where did it fit in the sort of creative scope of the bigger piece?
Well, it comes now as the second movement. And when I was writing the piece, I think essentially what I was trying to do was create a framework, a kind of psychological framework that made sense of that second movement. And so I've selected text to try and draw out a kind of large-scale narrative over about 40 minutes, I think it is, that would put the loss of that bird into a kind of context and hopefully steer the audience or the listener in a particular direction with relation to that bird song, what to make of this, how to feel.
Yeah.
And the bird song itself is a kind of leitmotif that appears throughout. You hear there are two very distinct motifs, and you hear both of them kind of worked into all the other movements.
Yeah, and it's an amazingly kind of intense and it's almost quite a small, intimate moment, isn't it? That you've just got the solo violin with the recording of the bird song at the same time. There's something incredibly kind of precious and exposed about that moment in the piece as a whole. But then the rest of the piece, there are some pretty enormously scaled moments, because it's not as if it's got a gigantic orchestra. It's a very big and virtuosic choral part, but I think one of the great successes of the piece is that with very relatively few pieces in the instrumental ensemble, there is this enormous cinematic sound world. So why did you choose those instruments? And just give us a little idea as to some of the techniques you used with the piano, the organ, and all that percussion to create those sound worlds.
Yeah, and the electronic soundtrack as well, which is kind of, that appears a number of times, and I hope is somewhat surprising to the audience, I think. So the percussion idea is taken from Benjamin Britten, that if you're writing for a small ensemble, percussion is very useful. Bass drum, tam-tam, those kind of things to give a more cinematic effect. Soloists, to kind of further the narrative, they kind of are playing roles within the piece. Big chorus for those kind of huge cinematic effects and text. And then the piano and organ, I guess, is a little bit odd. I obviously play both of them and feel comfortable writing for both of them. And I always feel whenever you're playing one, you sort of want the capabilities of the other. On the piano, you want the ability to sustain, and on the organ, you want the ability to attack. And so putting them together is quite interesting because you can have both. And then the violin, I was thinking I needed something soloistic to kind of soar over the top at
Yeah.
certain moments. And also, when I was rescoring that original piece, Silent Spring, I thought piano and violin would be an interesting way. The piano gives the harmony, and then the violin kind of speaks directly to the bird.
Yeah, okay. And then Out of Eden, as you said, is sort of 35, 40 minutes or so. But obviously, albums being the sort of length and size that they are, we needed some more music. So we had the discussion about doing a suite of shorter pieces, individual movements, using that interesting combination of instruments. So tell us a little bit about the Eden Suite and what you, how you wrote that, and what the sort of sound world is of those.
Yeah, the Songs of Eden suite was kind of, Out of Eden is this enormous kind of magnum opus, big psychological work, and we wanted to put something on the album that would be at kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, that would be more approachable, easier to engage with. And so I set about writing a little suite of pieces for vibraphone, which I don't know, I just really got obsessed with the idea of writing
Why
for
not?
vibraphone.
Yeah.
And there's a movement where it's bowed, and I really love
Yeah,
that
that's an
sound.
amazing quality. I'd not heard anything
Yeah.
quite like that before.
And quite a fun movement where all three are playing together, which, again, you're kind of playing with the different sounds that you have available there. When I was thinking how I was going to go about writing this suite, I was obviously thinking that I wanted something on the album to complement Out of Eden. And I went to this speech that was supposedly given by Chief Seattle, which is a kind of famous text that is probably apocryphal. It maybe approximates something he might have said, but is most likely a Western reporter giving his understanding of what this Native American chief was saying about the environment. And I took some particularly resonant phrases from there and used each of those phrases to write a movement.
Right.
Basically, I feel like I always need a kind of jumping off point to start writing. And so the movements themselves they're quite disparate in a way, but each of them is just a little picture of a particular phrase from that speech.
Yeah, and I found when we were recording those that they're all very short, they're a minute or a couple of minutes long each, that actually you're immediately in a sound world, and there's something quite expansive about them once the movement's underway. They sort of feel longer, and you're immersed in it they feel like greater pieces than just the 59 seconds might suggest with each one.
It's kind of you to say.
It's a sort of music to really just let wash over you, and I mean that in the best possible way.
I'm quite a miniature man as well. I like poetry more than prose. I like small things. I've written a lot of small things, and I guess I love when something is so small you feel you can get it exactly right.
Yes.
On something the scale of Out of Eden, there are always going to be corners where you think, oh, is that right? When it's just a minute long, you feel you can write something very satisfyingly perfect.
Yes.
So I'm kind of drawn to that. Each of them is just like a little quick sketch of an idea.
Absolutely. So on top of the large Out of Eden piece and the Songs of Eden suite, there are two shorter pieces, which I guess profile the choir, both texts by Kathleen Raine. Why those poems? What was the inspiration?
I love Kathleen Raine's poetry. I feel very drawn to her as a person. And when I was thinking of what would round out the disc, I was drawn. She has the way that she talks about the landscape feels to me that it kind of, there's a spirituality to her writing, and it's very deeply rooted in the land. And so that kind of speaks to the rest of the album as well. She writes, there are a set of spells, which actually have been set by Richard Rodney Bennett.
Okay.
I've known the spell of creation for a long time and loved it. And the spell of sleep also really spoke to me when I discovered it. And the spell of creation calls for like such a kind of multicolored setting.
Yeah.
It's an amazing sort of cinematic poem, and I kind of used all my harmonic resources to set that. And then Spell of Sleep is this lovely wish for someone to be at peace.
Yeah.
And I conceived of the idea of a kind of alto rhapsody.
Yes.
I loved Katie's voice, and I thought,
Yes.
okay, this is the perfect vehicle
Yeah.
for some good legato swooping,
Yeah.
for some big, rich textures.
So there's something, there are unifying threads across the whole album, even though at face value, you know, there's an instrumental suite, there are pieces that are much more chorus, choir focused, and then there's the sort of epic piece which has everybody in, but there are those unifying threads across it all.
Yeah, I guess I did a master's in environmental policy after I studied music, and have kind of feel that's another whole strand to my life, and I've spent a long time working on what I think about the environmental crisis, how I understand it. And I guess the album does look a bit disparate on the surface, and then I think what unites it all is it kind of springs from my thinking about the natural world and our relationship to it.
Yeah.
In these seemingly disparate settings, but for me, they all make sense, and I hope that the listener might be able to see what's underneath.
Yeah, I'm sure. And does your experience and your studies and your love of the environment and those causes, does that impact your other writings? I mean, I know you've written a lot of song, so voice and piano and so on. Is this an influence across everything you write, or a lot of what you write?
Not so much, I don't think, actually. The album of songs that came out in January, if there's anything that unites that, there's something to do with kind of mysticism and love. I would say that's the kind of theme of that album. This one feels very strongly environmental in nature. I sort of see all of our problems probably originating from some pretty simple but profound roots. And so I guess I do see everything as connected, but this album feels like it has very much its own identity. And Out of Eden was the first time probably where I really tried to use my skills as a musician to speak to the environmental crisis.
Yeah. And so is there a takeaway message from this that you would like listeners to come away thinking, or just feeling, or is there a bigger idea that you would like people to contemplate?
I guess the central thesis of Out of Eden is this idea that the environmental crisis is fundamentally a spiritual crisis and a crisis of relationship. I think in writing about it, I want to try and draw our attention back to it, because I feel that we as a society are constantly trying to take our eyes off this thing. And the piece is an attempt to help people to look at it squarely in the face. And there's probably a not very subtle message underneath it that actually, in order to solve this crisis, we need to look inside ourselves. And the Bible and all those biblical texts that I use, I think, provide a helpful framework for doing that. It's not an explicitly Christian piece. It happens to use Christian texts because those are the ones I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. But it would be that idea that the environmental crisis is fundamentally a crisis of relationship and a spiritual crisis.
Yeah, I would agree with that as somebody who, approached the piece for the premiere. And when we premiered it, there was such a sort of visceral reaction from the audience. And I think, to your point, it spoke immediately to everybody. There was a message there. And although a lot of the message is about self-reflection, wider reflection as a society, there is a sense of optimism and positivity about it all.
I didn't want to leave the audience feeling terrible.
Yes.
And so the final movement is a message of hope. This idea that basically, so long as there are children, there is hope, because there's an opportunity to do things differently, and that death and new life is the way that the world renews itself. Mm-hmm. And I, as a composer, I have occasionally worried about Out of Eden. Is this too didactic? I tried really hard to get the message, because there's such a short time to make it. The message is very front and center, clearly articulated. I hope and think that the response at the premiere was actually a sign that people had understood what I was trying to say and hadn't felt patronized by it, but had just gone on that journey.
Yeah.
And I really conceived the piece as a journey, that you start here and 35 minutes later you end up there. And I knew, in fact, actually what I wanted each movement to achieve, and then set out to find the words and then set those words to music in order to try and do that.
And I hope that aside from the messages of the piece, one of the big takeaways is just how direct it speaks to the listener. I would say that from a performer's perspective as well, there's something amazingly direct and open about the way you set the text, the way you use the instruments and the resources. And there is this age-old question, I guess, around a lot of contemporary music that perhaps we assume that it's either extremely avant-garde and frankly a bit difficult and a bit frightening to try and understand. And then at the other end, there is perhaps contemporary music that's just unashamedly and wonderfully accessible and straightforward and is not intended to challenge audiences in any way. But what I feel with your music is that it sits in this brilliant middle ground that perhaps not a lot of contemporary composers explore, which is using familiar harmonies, melodic languages, instrumentation, texts, all of those kind of things, but not being afraid to challenge the listener, challenge the players with extra devices, extra techniques, all of these things. And I think across the whole album, there's a brilliant use of those devices and thoughts, and I hope that listeners will pick up on that and respond to it.
I think so. It comes across amazingly in the album because we were able to control everything. But I really wanted to make it so that there wasn't a moment anywhere that people were going to drift off in the music. And so there are sort of constant effects being thrown at you, and nothing ever stays still for very long.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the hope, is that the audience can stay engaged right the way through the piece. And I'm very flattered to hear you think it sits in that middle spot, because that is what I aim to do.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think it's a great testimony to you that we as the musicians and the people who performed it were able to pick it up, run with it, love it and enjoy it straight from the get-go. So I hope that everybody enjoys what we created as much as we enjoyed performing it, and I hope you enjoyed writing it. And I'm very much looking forward to the release on the 26th. Congratulations.
Thanks, Mike.